is very helpful to realize that they're just feelings. And that was what was so fascinating. It wasn't trauma or trauma-free. Everybody has trauma.
One of the things I found compelling was the role that our psychological trauma and our childhood trauma can have on us. Because one of the psychologists I sat here with described it as gremlins and goblins. He said, Sir Steve Peters said, that some of us have goblins. These are the hard to move, hard to budge traumas, usually happen below the age of 10, that will just stay with us the whole time. You know, like really severe traumas. And then after that, generally speaking, they're gremlins where you can do work to kind of overcome them. When people are thinking about taking those steps in relationships or in their gym or whatever, you know, you talked about obesity, being clinically obese. Sometimes we have these goblins at the heart of us that limit us from taking that first step, that just act as a gravitational force against the behavior we want to take.
Right.
Can we overcome that? Is it relevant?
Well, so severe trauma is kind of out of scope for what I work on. But I would say for the goblins, as you describe them, that is where I think it is very helpful to realize that they're just feelings. They're just feelings, right? But feelings can be very convincing. But feelings don't happen to us, they happen for us. So if we can leverage that, if we can learn from that, if we can use it like rocket fuel to propel us towards what we want to do. If you look at, amazing artists or athletes, it's interesting how many of them have some kind of trauma, right? Have you ever noticed that? Like they're running away from something just as much as they're running towards something. They're trying to prove something to their alcoholic father. They're trying to prove something to somebody because of what happened to them. So, we have post-traumatic stress. We also have post-traumatic growth, depending on how we frame that and what we do with that discomfort. I mean, there's a lot of people who do amazing things driven by these same goblins that other people run away from. It's about how we reframe that discomfort.
Every successful person that sat here, in fact, the last person that sat in the chair, I asked them and they said they were basically running away from their trauma. And actually, they got diagnosed many years later in therapy with post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. They are the number one in their industry, I'd say.
Right? I mean, it's so common. And many of the people I interviewed for the book, that was what was so fascinating. It wasn't trauma or trauma-free. Everybody has trauma. And from these high performers, they all had it. Something. And we all do in some way. We've all suffered in one way or another. And of course, there's, it's very difficult. It's very touchy, but, it's very much subjective to us, how we deal with it, how we will grow from it. I think that's the big lesson. I think the psychology community as well will teach that it's about learning how to deal with that discomfort in a way that is adaptive, right? As opposed to maladaptive, something that hurts you, that these experiences are neutral. It's how we interpret them that matters.
That's a really key point that I've learned from doing what I do here. The point about trauma being neutral, it's a subjective thing. If someone snatches a toy off you and you're a kid, now you might interpret that as being a fun game, or you might interpret it as, I can't trust anybody. And it's like it's the same incident, but it's interpreted in two entirely different ways. And then that child might then go on to be incredibly successful because they were low in trust.
Right.
But then that might hurt their personal relationships.
Yeah.
And the other child who had the same thing happen to them might just be,
And it's not only psychologically true, but also physiologically true. I don't know if you've read Mind Body Prescription.
No.
It's an old book, but it basically is a lot of people read it for back pain. And it's incredible. I had my last company, a business partner of mine, she would be on the floor in pain. In the middle of the day, she would have to go to a back office because she just could not move. She was in so much pain. And her husband had incredible carpal tunnel. He would wear all kinds of devices and stuff to try and immobilize his hands, and he really suffered. And then they came across this book, The Mind Body Prescription, which basically talks about how you don't want to stop doing the painful actions, that most pain is chronic type pain after the healing has occurred. Of course, there's a window, right? If you still have pain, I think, 6 months? If you still have pain, then it's called chronic pain. That the body has already healed within that time period. We're sure the body is healed. Why is there still pain? That there isn't necessarily, pain does not mean physical trauma per se. And I think this is relevant to psychological trauma as well. The pain happens because we focus on our attention on the pain. You can't have pain without attention. Do you notice that? You can't have pain without attention. There's these cases, by the way, in World War I where soldiers would drag their buddies to the medic and say, medic, my buddy's dying, you need to help him. And the medic would look at the soldier and say, soldier, your arm is gone. And he'd look and he wouldn't notice that half his arm is missing because pain requires attention. So when we overfocus on our pain, when all we pay attention to is our pain, and I'm saying here physiologically as well as psychologically, the pain becomes worse. The pain becomes worse. When we say, and more so, when we try and not do the thing that causes us pain. So now the advice is not, if you have a back pain issue, it used to be, okay, well, immobilize, don't move, don't stretch, don't just, rest. And now the advice is really changing. Same with carpal tunnel. It's not, get all the wrist braces and don't move your wrist. It's the opposite. Is if you feel back pain, do whatever caused that pain 3 times. Because you want to regulate the brain to learn that this is not a threat. Again, emotions, pain don't happen to us. They happen for us. It's a lesson for us to learn from. It's just a signal. Now we can interpret that signal any way we want. So when we hyper-focus on something that was painful, physiologically or psychologically, when we don't do the thing that caused us discomfort, right? When we want to go to safe spaces with trigger warnings and we're not exposed to the things that make us uncomfortable, that only makes it worse and worse and worse because we're paying more attention to it and we don't have the exposure. We know the way to treat phobias. How do you treat a phobia? Exposure therapy. Right? So when someone's scared of a dog, right? When someone has severe reaction to a dog, what do? Well, first you show them a picture of a puppy. Then you show them a picture of a full-grown dog. Then you show them a video. Then eventually you put them in a room with the puppy out the other side of the room, 20 feet away. Then you expose them to the threat until their brain downregulates and teaches itself not to cause this reaction, this emotional reaction to this potential stressor. And so it's the same way with many of the potential discomforts in our life.
Isn't it the same way with just belief itself, like self-belief? You think about how our beliefs form. People always, ask me questions, and one of the most popular questions anyone wants to know in the sort of self-development community is about how we become confident. And confidence is a belief. And one of the ways that I've become confident in my life is by exposure therapy, I guess.
Yeah.
How you learn to speak on a stage is by doing it. Like there's no other, you can't read a book on it to get it overcome the nerves. Have you thought much about confidence and the role it plays in everything we've discussed today and how to build confidence?
Funny you should say getting on stage. So I'm a professional public speaker. I do that a lot.
It shows.
Thank you.
Very good.
Well, okay. Well, let me back up a few years. So when I first started out, I wrote the book first, and then I started speaking about it. And when I would get on stage, I would have incredible stage fright. And at first, this is with my first book, Hooked. And I would tell myself this script of when I felt my heartbeat, when I would get sweaty pits, and I get very nervous. And I tell myself, it's funny just talking about it, I can actually feel it. I would tell myself, if I was a real public speaker, I wouldn't feel this way. I'm going to mess up. I'm going to stumble over my words. I'm going to fall flat, and people are going to laugh at me. And I would do worse on stage. And then when I started researching Indistractable, I found this technique called reimagining the trigger. And reimagining the trigger is when we take the same exact physiological reactions and we reinterpret them. So now when I go on stage and I feel my heart racing, I don't use the old script. I have a new script. The new script says, my heart is beating fast because it is pumping oxygen to my brain so I can deliver the best possible talk. That's where confidence comes from, is reframing the triggers. What used to scare you should embolden you, should strengthen you.
Someone that's low confidence, what are they lacking in something? Are they lacking in positive evidence, or are they abundant in negative evidence? I guess it can be either or.
I think they're stuck to a script, frankly.
Okay.
I mean, this is why we see Michael Pollan's book, How to Change a Mind, why psychedelics are so interesting for treatment of depression, anxiety, and various conditions. It's not the drug itself, right? There's no healing taking. I mean, even the whole concept of the broken brain and chemical imbalance. This whole chemical imbalance theory turns out it's rubbish. Nobody believes it anymore in the psychology community. It's only the public that thinks that there's a brain chemical imbalance. It's not fixing anything in the brain. It's simply showing you that a different perspective exists. That's all it does. It simply shows you that a different perspective exists. And that can snap you out of this, what we call a trapped prior, a trap belief around how things are, and says, wait a minute, I don't have to think that way. So when it comes to confidence, I mean, what do actors do? Actors inhabit completely different characters on demand, right? And that's a skill I think we could try on for size. We should actually once in a while say, well, what would it be like if I acted different, right? Do I have to stick to my old beliefs? No, there's no law that says you have to act the same way every day. It's simply that our sense of self, our self-image is based on what we did previously.